Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer, and thank you so much for joining us today. I do have a request. If you are watching us on our YouTube channel, you can also catch us wherever fine podcasts are uploaded. If you are listening to us on one of those fine podcast platforms and you want to watch what's going on here in the studio, you can also watch us on YouTube. Please subscribe, leave us a like, leave us a review, and as always, let your friends know, your family members know, your family members' friends, your friends' family members know that you are a watcher, listener to the Lunch Hour podcast. Now, this is a very special episode, and I don't mean that in the same way that they used to mean it on those cheesy 80s sitcoms, but this is a very important and very timely episode of the Lunch Hour. Now, as we are recording this, there is great tumult happening on college campuses all around the country. Student protesters taking over college campuses, allegedly, ostensibly, protesting in support of the so-called Palestinians and the conflict in Gaza. Joining us today is someone who's going to help us break down if this is really the case and what's going on and what ought to be done about it. His name is Zachary Marschall. He holds a PhD from George Mason University. He is the editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. He's also an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. He does a series called Academically Speaking for Campus Reform, and it reveals how radical ideas are originating in academia impact Americans' daily lives. He is also a member of the National Association of Scholars. And Zachary, as I said, this is a really timely episode for us. We're going to make sure we get it up as soon as possible. As we are recording this, last night, protesters at Columbia University took over Hamilton Hall, named for President Hamilton. They renamed it Hiltz Hall, which I'm sure you can get into what that is. I think they missed the boat by not naming it Hunts Hall for all of my listeners who are big fans of the Bowery Boys. But this is, Columbia seems to be the epicenter of this. Let's talk about what happened last night at Columbia.
Yeah, so what happened was we had a 2 p.m. deadline at Columbia University, at which time President Shafiq said those who are remaining in the encampment will get suspended. Now, I've lost track of how many deadlines and extensions there are, but there are quite a lot. I need more than 2 hands to count. And so the students, of course, don't fear her. I don't think anyone would fear her. She has no backbone. And they are egged on by professional protest organizers who are not even Columbia students. They are on campus helping these students figure out how to take over a building, and that's what they did. And we can characterize this very honestly, that Hamas militants stormed Columbia and invaded the campus. They are occupying Hamilton Hall, and as of our conversation right now, there's no resolution to that.
It's interesting to me. So I'm a student of protest movements. I was fascinated by protest movements when I was a teenager. I think I'm a little bit older than you are, but not much. But, protest music is a big thing in my life. I was very much a student of the free speech movements and the anti-war movements of the 60s. And one of the books that I read was a book called The Strawberry Statement, written by a man named James Cunin, who was one of the organizers of Students for a Democratic Society at Columbia University. And the thing that I come back to, now we could talk about entitlement and privilege, especially entitlement and privilege on college campuses. But the thing that struck me is that the civil rights movement was about gaining civil rights for African Americans and other oppressed minorities in the United States. And the free speech movement was about making sure we could talk about important issues of the day. The anti-war movement had a particular sentiment to these students because they didn't want to have to go off and fight in a war that they didn't believe in. They didn't want to get drafted. But these students on these campuses, it seems to me that they are trying to relive the 60s, but they don't have any personal skin in the game. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is very much different than the 60s protests, right, especially 68, because as much as you might disagree with what they were doing back then, the new left was always for something. Right now, these people are only against on something, and that something is Jews. They hate Jews who live in Israel, and they hate Jews who live in the United States. What is happening is that you have professors who came of age in the 60s and 70s
Right.
and became tenured academics, and then they populated the hiring and promotion committees. They populated peer-reviewed journals and curriculum review committees, and they taught 2 generations worth of students how to hate America, hate every symbol of Western democracy and capitalism, and then look at Jews as, the so-called symbol of that system and learn to hate them, and then present it in very coded messages as anti-Israel work.
So let's get that's a perfect pivot, because I want to come back to the anti-American stuff, because I had a really weird conversation with a family member last week. But for a very long time, the left was able to get away with the idea that there was a difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Not so much so now when you see protesters at Columbia saying, go back to Poland, which is such an insulting statement. Now, my family's not from Poland. My family was from Romania. I lost family members in the Holocaust. But so that's the sentiment resonates with me. The statement resonates with me. So when did they come out and become unabashed anti-Semites, or when did they finally take the mask off? And why? Why now?
It was gradual. It's been happening and getting worse over the last decade or so. So it's been pretty public and obvious within academia to people who follow academia and people who are in it. But October 7th was really the first time we saw it come out in public. And Americans who have no connection to universities anymore, or who did not want to acknowledge what is residing on the left, had to confront their denialism, because October 7th was this wake-up call and this moment for anti-Semitic leftists they've been dreaming of. They want nothing more than to LARP being revolutionaries. And professors want nothing more than to unleash their students as revolutionaries, not so differently than that scene from Wizard of Oz when the Wicked Witch sends her monkeys off to capture Dorothy.
Monkeys, sure.
That's what they think they're doing. And so they saw it as, their time. And at Campus Reform, we've been saying for years now that they replaced education with activism.
Right.
And you only have to look at the encampments to see that's true. There's not one student who is trying to take their finals from a tent. They don't care about the final grades. They don't care about suspensions or expulsions. And, just to go back to your point about Poland, these people have no idea what they're talking about. Right. One of my family lines that goes back to Ashkenazi Jewish families is called the Greenbergs. There are 3 lines. One line went to New York, one line went to Tel Aviv, one line stayed in Warsaw, and that line doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Right. I mean, it is, listen, it's that very poignant moment at the end of Schindler's List, where in the pre-credit crawl, they say that there are more descendants of Schindler Jews, the Jews saved by Oskar Schindler, than there are Jews living in Poland today, and that's that says it all. It's interesting. So when Zachary talks about LARPing, what he's saying is live action role play, which is something that folks, it's kind of I would say cosplay adjacent, Comic-Con adjacent. In that regard, but I think you're right here. It's folks who want to role play at being revolutionary. Well, there's an element of role play, but then there really is this element of indoctrination that has happened over the last, I'm going to go and say 50 years. And let me pivot to this conversation that I had, Zachary. So I live in Williamsburg, Virginia. I think a lot of my watchers and our viewers and listeners know this. And I was at a family wedding a couple of weeks ago, Jewish wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, and had somebody ask me about Colonial Williamsburg, which is a property here for the uninitiated. Colonial Williamsburg is a living history museum. Have you ever been here, Zachary? I'm sorry, I gotta.
Oh yeah.
Call you Zach.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
All right. So the point is, it is supposed to be centered around the principles, teaching people about the principles of the American founding, the American Revolution, et cetera, the cradle of a democratic republicanism, Republican democracy, et cetera, however you want to tout it. And I talked a little bit about that. And I had a cousin, older cousin, essentially tell us and everybody at the table that they think, and this is someone who is of advanced age, and I think should know better, frankly, that we don't need to study history, that it's not important to study history, that we get nothing out of this. And to which I push back and I said, well, the problem, of course, is if we don't have some kind of common frame of reference as to who we are as a people, right? Some common frame of reference as to the principles upon which America was founded and an agreement of who we are, where we're from. And he took that to mean geographically. And I know we're not all from the same area geographically. But if we can't agree on some sort of basic ideas as to what America is, we can't come together and solve problems when we are in times of crisis. And it seems to me, and this gets into the central work that you guys are doing at Campus Reform and your Academically Speaking work, that over the last half century, I would say more, probably 60 years, there's been a concerted effort to undermine that common heritage. Your thoughts here?
I think you're totally right. I think the best example this week is at University of Southern California.
Oh.
The university canceled its graduation ceremony because it can't guarantee safety of the people because of the encampment.
Yeah.
So we right now have a pinnacle of this trend you're talking about, where students care more about dividing classmates and they care more about sowing division than they care about coming together as a campus community. We have students at UCLA this week making physical boundaries with their bodies, checking IDs basically, and asking people, are you Jewish? Well, you're not allowed into campus if you're Jewish. I mean, this is what happened in 1930s Germany. So I think history is a very useful tool here.
Let's talk a little bit about USC. My favorite moment, because I think it points to something much, much bigger. So I was, as you know, because I talked to you this last week, I was in for a friend of mine on his radio show. I played a TikTok from a young woman who is supposed to be graduating from class of 2024 at USC. And she tells a story about how her high school graduation was in fact also canceled because of COVID. And I talked about the context that we need to remember, right? That these are the same students. I have a child who's graduating from college in a week and a half. The same sort of things were happening. My favorite part of this was the email that USC sent out to students. And this is a legitimate email. It's not somebody making this up saying, yeah, we know, essentially responding to the student, we know that some of you have never experienced a graduation before. So here are some pictures of, have you seen this email, Zachary? Here are some emails of some pictures of previous graduations so you can see what a joyful experience it was. And it seems to me that this is exactly the kind of elitist mentality that we have out there. There are rules for thee, but not for us or me. We can always get by. We are the ones who are able to have graduations. We're the ones able to drive a new car with an internal combustion engine. We can have our fancy gas stoves. We don't have to drive on mass transit. I know we keep coming back to the transportation thing, but all of this, it seems to sum up this elitist attitude. What do you think about that?
I think you're right, and I think we can draw a straight line here from 2020 to 2024. The same spineless and weak-willed liberal elites who said in 2020 and then through 2023, out of abundance of caution, we're not going to do this, and we're going to cancel this. Everyone who said abundance of caution in those 3 years are now saying, oh, we can't keep the campus safe. We have to relocate you because the terrorists need their little tent area.
Do you think it's weakness, or is this, I mean, not that, listen, I'm a firm believer in Hanlon's razor, never ascribe to malice what can easily be attributed to stupidity. But it seems to me that for the folks who are, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm not going to add a butt statement there, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. It just seems to me that these are yet other opportunities for folks to exercise control over situations and to make people submit. The issue of submission is very important. Submit to the tyranny. What do you think about that?
I don't think there's a university in control of its own campus right now. Even the universities that have done the best, job calling in the police, arresting students right away. The universities that have done the right thing are learning this week that that's not enough and they are undeterred. So we especially see Shafiq at Columbia, who's quote unquote running, and I use that term loosely, the university. When I say weak-willed, I look at that as a product of her naive cosmopolitanism. She thinks this is all a misunderstanding because of cultural difference. And if only we could talk with each other and learn to love each other, then this could all go away. That's complete nonsense, and she should know better. So I see the same kind of things where people threw up their hands and said, "Oh, COVID is out of our hands. We just have to trust the experts about this." They're the ones who are, deferring to these student terrorists about how to run the campus.
It's a mindset that ignores what has gone on these campuses again for the last half century, right? It would be one thing if there had been a culture of, I don't want to use the term civility, if there had been a culture of skepticism and actual academic debate, right? As you've been talking about, these are places of where they're I say indoctrination, you'd say teaching activism. If these were places where there was rigorous academic and respectful, I don't have to use the word civil, but respectful debate and an understanding that people have other opinions, right? Then you can say, okay, let's have a dialogue about this. But if you don't have those, if you don't have that culture, if you have in fact driven that culture from these academic institutions, you can't have civil conversation about this, right?
Completely. And, I think you're dead on saying, 50 years ago, we go back 60 years. And
Yeah.
Morris Dickstein, who was a Jewish professor who came of age as a young professor and scholar in the CUNY system in the 1960s, writes about the culture you just described. It's, it's the last few years of when higher education was a liberal education and about instilling serious values and habits. And that is just eroded away bit by bit, and it accelerated in the 1980s when you had postmodernism kind of undo every core foundation of our society. And this is now the culmination of that turn.
Right. It is astounding. On the issue of faculty members, I want to come back to this because again, sometimes I delve a little bit more into sort of personal anecdotes and how they intercede, and maybe because this is such a personal issue for me. Had a friend from college, Jewish friend from college, as it happened. In fact, I dare say I had mutual friends who wanted us to be together. I had sort of worked to that end. Never happened though. So this is someone who wound up resigning from her position at the Department of the Interior because she was protesting President Trump. She just tweeted out pictures of what's going on at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and a ring of faculty members standing around the students protesting in the middle and speaking admiringly about the courage of these faculty members to stand and protect of these students. And again, I was galled by this, understanding her heritage and just what is going on here, but also because this is not behavior that should be applauded, right? This is not the same thing as students standing up because they don't want to get sent off to Vietnam and fight and perhaps die in Vietnam without their consent. This is something totally different. I mean, are you as galled as I am by that? I mean, what do you make of this?
I'm not galled because I'm not surprised, and I was around these people as a PhD student and a master's student. So, I'm kind of, to be honest, I'm frustrated and angry on a level I don't know if I can describe accurately because, I've been saying this for years, Campus Reform's been saying this for years, and no one would believe it until they had to see it today. And it's frankly too little too late to say, oh my gosh, you're right. These are the teachers that have been hired. When you look at the way DEI statements were being imposed on potential faculty, when you get rid of standardized testing, when you have diversity committees choose based on optics and engineered outcomes, these are the professors that are the result. And what are they? They're activist coaches, and they will they choose to indoctrinate and they choose to brainwash. So you have a gamut of students out there, and it runs a spectrum. Some know exactly what they're saying and exactly what they're doing, but they're brainwashed about the facts about it. And others are just completely lost individuals who are trying to fill a void in their life through the latest fashionable thing to march for.
You teach at the college level. I have taught at the college level. One of the things that I always made sure in my classes, because I taught in public policy, I taught on the regulatory process, and I taught on lobbying and advocacy. And I made it really clear to my students. I said, I specifically don't want you to regurgitate what I'm telling you. I want you to look at what I'm telling you with a skeptical eye. I want you to think for yourself, and you will not be graded by matching my ideology. In fact, I'm going to try very hard to make sure that I'm not imposing my ideology on you. I'm sure you're the same way. again, is this an outcropping of the 1960s? Is that what changed? That, folks went into academia and they felt like they needed to get control so that they could go down this road?
Oh, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
you have to look at, I think you're totally right. And the distinguished conservative professors, whether it's, we're talking about Epstein or Bloom, those professors are not there anymore. There's the only ones left are the ones who are at the very end of, near retirement. And there was a critical mass that happened in the 1990s when you have the rise of Judith Butler and Camellia Page. They started taking over the entire institution.
Mm-hmm.
So viewpoint diversity became a thing of the past, and every tool to enforce rigor and enforce standards in universities became null and void, because while the mechanisms were still there, they were populated by like-minded people who ranged from liberal to leftist. So when you look among people who only want to veer more and more left, the idea of enforcing standards becomes kind of a moot point.
It really is about the long game, isn't it? The idea of we know we're not going to achieve the transformation overnight. I mean, listen, we all want I'm speaking for the left. Like, the leftist says, I would want radical revolution today, but I know it's not going to happen. Mao said, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." I'm working on a healthcare issue, which has been literally a quarter century in the making. And the left is finally on the precipice of achieving victory. I think this is what you're talking about. This is the culmination of something that was by design, starting in the mid to late 1960s and accelerated into the 90s and today, right?
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I've said before publicly, if it sounds like a conspiracy, that's because it is.
Again, I don't. Right. I guess we need to distinguish between the crazy the tinfoil hat, and right. I want to say it was Woody Allen. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you.
Exactly. Like, to conspire means to plot and to coordinate. And what we're seeing right now across these campuses is the epitome of fantastically funded coordination and organization.
By whom? Let's talk about that. Where is the money coming from?
It's coming from, well, for one thing, it's coming from George Soros, his Open Societies Foundation, funnels money into nonprofit organizations in the United States that funnel money into different actors that are in touch with these campuses. So he's able to maintain plausible deniability because he's a few degrees separated from the actual encampments, but all you have to do is follow the money to see the effects. We're also seeing a lot of when you said so-called Palestinians, I think that's the perfect adjective for a Palestinian, so-called. We're seeing a lot of Palestinian rights groups who are, try to do lobbying or like national activism or grassroots. They're funneling money into this. And Students for Justice in Palestine, the national organization that has a lot of chapters on college campuses, many of whom are now suspended, is really at the forefront behind organizing these tents. I mean, these brand new tents that are all look the same.
That's really interesting to me. It's like we're all going to go to Amazon. We're going to buy the same. We're going to buy the same tent. It's like piles of bricks magically showing up in Washington D.C. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's off-campus funding and it's off-campus activists riling up the work that's already been done on campus.
It's interesting you bring up Soros, because the aforementioned healthcare issue that I was talking about, the person who's funded this organization for the last 25 years to upend the intellectual property rights of research institutions, George Soros, or the Open Society Foundation, I should say. I should be really clear about that, given heavily to that, or one of the organizations that I'm talking about. That's the thing. It's the long game. It's knowing. I mean, right? It was Mao who said, "We will sell the capitalists the rope with which they hang themselves." I like to talk about Khrushchev's speech to the UN in '62, in which he comes and says it was reported as "we will bury you." What he was really saying is, "We will be at your funeral. We are going to do whatever we can to use the tenets, the things that make Western democratic society strong. We're going to use those principles: free speech, freedom of the press, freedom of expression. We're going to use those against you to undermine you fundamentally." 10 years later, we have teachers, on the precipice of the bicentennial of the United States, which is part of how I came to my, free market limited government values. I came of age in 1976, partially. But at the same time, you have teachers telling students, just remember what you're celebrating: a bunch of white slave owning taxpayers or white slave owning property owners who didn't want to pay their taxes, sullying, the greatest revolution for freedom in mankind's history. Because of that, it's very, very much the long game. So let's talk about some of the other campuses that are out there. Any, besides Columbia and USC and UCLA, anything else stand out in terms of real problem hotspots? Oh, Harvard, we could go, but you might want to talk about Harvard. Anyway, your thoughts.
I think the most underreported campus right now is Cal Poly Humboldt, which is in central to northern California.
Oh, yeah. If it's crazy and it's California, chances are it's a Cal Poly Humboldt. Sorry, go ahead, Zachary.
Well, a few months ago, I wrote an article for Campus Reform that said California is the eye of the storm for all this anti-Semitism, and I hate to say how much that article's aged pretty well. Cal Poly Humboldt, that campus is closed for the rest of the academic year because the students rioted within its administrative buildings and caused what initial reports say are millions of dollars in damage. At first, it looked like graffiti and trash. Now it looks like physical damage, and it looks like something the university is going to struggle to even finance to rebuild. We're still trying to confirm the extent of the damage, but it's enough to shut down the school for the rest of the year. It's now all online.
What about the opposite? Are there any bright spots in terms of college campuses? I know my own alma mater, the College of William and Mary, has been relatively peaceful, but not that they need to be promoted for that. But any Liberty University story that's not getting promoted at all, had a massive prayer vigil in favor of Israel. No violence there. No violence at Catholic University. They had a prayer vigil as well. Bright spots that are out there. Who's doing it right, and what are they doing right?
Florida is doing it right. The schools there are very. Excellent. It is minimal. It is within. If I can be generous, what I'm seeing at FSU, for example, is within the boundaries of political speech. So it's, not going into anti-Semitism. There are no encampments because the DeSantis administration and the UF system put its foot down and said, you're going to do this, we're going to throw you in jail, more or less. And the students are, I think, scared of DeSantis, as they should be. So I'm glad to see that there. I think University of Texas took very swift action, and it's not 100% resolved there, but it's one of the better universities, I think, that is in terms of how they're performing.
I saw a reaction. I think it was from the University of Florida, at least a quote from an email. Our colleges are not daycare centers. These are adults, and they will face the consequences of their actions. I mean, that's exactly that's the thing that gets me. Let's pull it back to the 30,000 foot level for a moment, Zachary. Because it seems to me that there's something that's been lost. Now, I graduated from college, over 30 years ago. Again, I'm going to age myself. But there was a certain degree of agency that was accrued to these students. They were acting on their own behalf. And I think some of that was an outcropping of what we learned about the 60s protests. You have young people who have agency to act on their own behalf. That's why, we moved to lower the voting age from 21 to 18, something I think we ought to be reversing, but that's just me. Somewhere along the way, we stopped giving students agency as adults and started treating them as children and letting the children run the asylum, which is an insane way of, even if we wanted to look at it through a parenting dynamic, is an insane way of parenting. What do you make of that? When do we lose it? When did these kids lose their agency?
I think they lost their agency probably in the last 8 years. I think Trump had a huge impact on all this. I think it's whatever you think of Trump, you can't deny that his candidacy and his election in 2016 made half the country go crazy.
Sure.
And it's not a coincidence. It's a happy coincidence of history, but it was also organic to the movement against Trump that you had the Star Wars Force Awakening trailers appearing around the same time Trump was gaining traction. And the trailer had the tagline, "It's the resistance." And this is where it all started. It became a cultural tagline that got appropriated by the anti-Trump lunatics. And they have not stopped trying to, be the resistance ever since.
I love the fact you bring up a Star Wars reference. Again, as we're
Yeah.
recording this, it is just before Star Wars Day, May the 4th. I am a Star Wars fan, generally. But, it's interesting you say that, right? Because, again, the first of the prequels, oh, good Lord, which now I can't remember. Not The Force Awakens. It was the Phantom Menace. The Phantom Menace was George Lucas's response to the government shutdown and anger about Republicans in Congress and stymieing things in Congress. And it was just so bad, right? The main head of the Trade Federation was Newt Gunray, supposed to be, a play on Newt Gingrich. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know if you were a Star Wars fan. When it delves into the politics, right? Yeah. Listen, I'm all about understanding a little bit more about the way that the old Republic worked and the Empire worked. That's why I like a lot of the new series, because they're a little bit more realistic in that regard. But it's when Star Wars starts making these political statements, things tend to go off the rails, don't they?
Yeah. I was just going to say, as far as when college students started acting like school children, I think this week we might have hit a new low. Yeah. We have GW students arguing with the administration about bathroom access in buildings because people in the tenant encampment are really out in the buildings, and they're now using buckets outside as a form of resistance.
Listen, it's funny. For me, the straw that broke the camel's back before this was the story about the students at Sarah Lawrence College, just outside of New York City, demanding free food and free laundry year-round for students living in the dorms. I don't remember if they were also asking for free housing, but it was a situation in which, Sarah Lawrence is not an inexpensive college to begin with, but it's like, okay, something? At some point in time, you got to pay for your own food. You got to pay for your own laundry. Certainly not year round. It's like, go home. Go home at some point in time. Let me peel this back a little bit. Again, going back to the 30,000 foot level. Actually, I want to do two things. Number one, let's talk about the general issue with American Judaism and the divisions. And I know this is not necessarily your bailiwick within campus reform. It may very well be. But as a conservative, and I mean politically conservative Jew, I wonder, you wonder, what's going on here with the adherents. And I'll give you a really good example. I've got a buddy who runs a Jewish community center up in, it's not, I guess actually by my definition, I think it is upstate New York. But the point is, he wrote a Facebook post about being a Zionist, being a proud Zionist. And somebody else in the area, another Jewish gentleman, and I use that term loosely, the gentleman part of it, attacked him and attacked people who were on the page. And someone made, shall we say, a very forceful statement about what ought to happen with Gaza and the terrorist in Gaza. And my friend was not quick enough to defend it or modify it or whatever, and or oppose it. And this person then took the screenshot and sent it to the New York State Civil Rights Commission, to the county executive in their county, and a bunch of different leaders of this. I guess my point is, again, getting to what you and I have been talking about the very disturbing similarities between what is happening on these campuses and things that were taking place in Germany as the Nazis were rising to power. What is it about our family members, and I will say that our family members who don't seem to understand that 90 years ain't so long ago, especially for our people in terms of what's happened. You talk about this.
I think, and this is, I'm Jewish and I'm politically conservative, and I struggle with the reality that those of our tribe that are on the political left somehow feel voting against our interests makes them sophisticated and smart. Like it's a badge of honor to vote and champion for causes that kind of go against the political and social safety interests of being American Jews. I think Reform Judaism has kind of mutated beyond traditional religion and become more about social justice and activism. I was very involved. I've lived in DC for 14 years, and I've been very involved in professional young, Jewish organizations.
Yeah.
And on the retreat, I went to a retreat in Maryland. I attended a lot of meetings. It was dominated by secular and Reformed Jews who talked about they don't believe that God as an entity is existing. They see Judaism as more a platform for making a better world. And you have to think to yourself, is this a platform or is this a religion?
Right. It's interesting because I don't know where you grew up. I grew up in New York. And I grew
up in Syracuse.
I'm sorry? Oh, Syracuse, way upstate. I mean, I grew up down in the city. And I went to an ethical humanist high school. And ethical humanism was a society founded. Are you familiar with ethical humanism? The Society for Ethical Culture. Felix Adler, whose father was the rabbi at, I want to say Temple Bethel, founded a society where Jews can practice essentially an ethical religion without religion, faith without faith is what I tend to call it. And you're right. I went to a cousin's kid's bat mitzvah, and her portion of the Torah was talking about the story of Noah, right? And why Noah did what he did. And essentially her interpretation was that Noah was defying peer pressure. It became an exercise in discussing peer pressure. I'm like, okay, well, what about faith? And what about trusting what God had to say? And all of these really important things that have to do with faith. And I came away feeling very sad about that because, again, it's, you have to, again, it's faith. I think you're correct. But let me ask you, have you ever done in the DC area, I don't know if they still do it, Panim? An organization called Panim used to do these debates. They used to bring Jewish kids in from all around the country to hear debates among policy people. No, you're looking at me like I'm crazy. So the point is that I used to go and talk about energy and environment issues, and one of the things they talked about was tikkun olam. I'm butchering it because I don't know Hebrew, but right, the idea of giving back, I think, is the sentiment. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I think you're right in that when it comes back to it, if your religion is really not about faith and religion, but about practice, you tend to not be able to see the forest for the trees, and you tend not to feel the danger. Am I right? Am I right in that? Your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think you are. And that might still be going on in DC, but I never saw it when I was very active in those groups. The only, I got a lot of invitations, and they were all more kumbaya things than they were about debate. I went to against my better judgment, I went to a Passover Seder one year that was supposed to be inclusive of, they meant it, officially it was inclusive of all denominations of Judaism, but in practice it was inclusive of all ideas. Yeah. And, beyond, it kind of went beyond Judaism. Anyway, so during the Haggadah, the guy leading it just stops reading, and he starts crying when we get to the portion around, finally walking through the Red Sea. And he says, as a gay black man, I just have to say, and my head went down the table, and I don't think it came up for the rest of the night. I was so disgusted by the absolute departure from, the Jewish oral tradition, that what was handed out to Moses from God. This is not to be deviated from to create a new foundation of faith. It is to be interpreted, and it's to be practiced among Jews wherever we get pushed to in the world and as technology advances. It's not for them to reinvent.
As far as I'm concerned, there is only one Haggadah to use, and that is the Maxwell House Coffee Haggadah that you got at the supermarket if you bought X number of cans of Maxwell House coffee, because that's what my family used to use. So the work that you guys are doing at Campus Reform, how do we come back from this, Zachary? I mean, is there a way? What needs to happen? I mean, again, I'm not sure we can wait another 50 years, but obviously if we make the commitment, but I'm not even so sure if we made the commitment today, what would we do? Your thoughts here, the work that you guys are doing on this.
I think there's a lot of proposals out there. For example, there's a bipartisan bill that's about to be introduced in Congress that would create anti-Semitism monitors to find whether or not universities are actually protecting Jews and then de-accredit them as punishment. it's noble in spirit, but I think it's going to be ineffective because I think
Yeah.
the federal government is ineffective. I have 13 federal investigations open from 33 Title VI complaints
Wow.
to universities. That is, and then I think that feat represents what is good and what is bad about the process. What's bad is that it's the federal government and things move very, very slowly there. But we are seeing that because of the investigations that were opened up in the last 6 months because of anti-Semitism, there were like 44, 45 total as of last week. Universities are now taking on these encampment occupiers in a way they never would have in October or November. So that's progress. So I think the best way to fix the university is to do external pressure, whether it's through mega donors, saying we're going to boycott you. We're seeing Harvard admissions rates go down because people don't want to be associated with anti-Semitism there. And I've said, time and time again, one of the refrains that the left loves to use is you can't rebuild a master's house with a master's tools. I think it goes both ways. And I think the only change we're going to see is complete overhaul and destruction of how higher education works right now. And it needs to be destroyed from the outside and rebuilt from the outside.
It's interesting because, right, that's part of the reason why the left is pushing for student loan forgiveness and for making college tuitions free. If the government is funding it, then it insulates them from the outside societal pressure, the donor pressure. I'm reminded of a situation at William & Mary, my alma mater, where the president who promised to leave his politics at the schoolyard gate proceeded to come in and remove an historic cross from a chapel. Cross from the oldest Episcopalian church in the United States, or one of the oldest, Episcopalian churches in the United States, that was in the Wren Chapel, the oldest academic building still in use in America, and unilaterally decided to remove it. And then there was an outpouring of alumni, regardless of their religion, for this, because William & Mary doesn't have a religion. If it did, it would be history and tradition. And when you mess with that history and tradition, you weather the storm. Let me ask you this. Let's sort of shift gears for a minute, Zachary, because, as I like to say, and I say this every week, but I need to explain it to my guests. When I was contemplating a new podcast, and I now do 3 podcasts, which is crazy. Nobody should do 3 podcasts. I was originally contemplating a podcast that I was calling Outside Interests. And the idea was to talk to people who are involved in politics and policy about the things that they do that aren't related to politics and policy, because I think that humanizes people. I think it helps folks build a connection to the folks that they're hearing from. So let's talk about this. I mean, you may not have any outside interests. This may be your all-consuming life's work, but I would like to think that you do. When you're not doing this work for campus reform, what are you up to?
I am reading. I do a lot of reading for my job, teaching doctoral students. I also do arts research and criticism. My biggest passion in life is the arts and theater. I, just had a art review from the National Gallery in DC be published in New Criterion last month.
On?
There was a exhibition there called The Anxious Eye about art in Germany from German Expressionism from about the early 1900s up till World War II, and then its revival around the 1960s to 80s. So I wrote about kind of the social context of how those works were created. And I actually have a master's degree from Newhouse in arts journalism. So, I think people who watch my interviews think I live and breathe politics, or I live and breathe.
This is the point.
Campus anti-Semitism. But no, my entire life's focus is really on cultural history.
So, and theater as well. So not just visual arts, but theater as well. Talk a little bit about that. Because I got a question I want to ask, but I just want to feel you out first before I ask it. Go ahead.
Oh, I grew up in the real upstate New York, and I grew up going to Broadway, 2-3 times a year, and I loved it. And I went to NYU, and opera is one of my biggest passions. I go to, I love to travel. I go to a foreign country at least one foreign country every year, and I go to opera wherever I travel. I was just in Milan and went to La Scala. So this is what I could talk about, all day.
One of my one of my best friends from high school, who I'm still friends with, she tends to lean libertarian, which is interesting. Again, coming out of my high school, her father was a singer and a teacher at the Met in New York for many, many years.
Oh, okay.
Nico Castell. So, and I'm just throwing her under the bus by saying she's a libertarian. I apologize. You have a favorite musical from either growing up or currently?
Oh, that's a good question. I think Sunday in the Park with George is probably my favorite musical.
A hat.
Yeah, exactly.
You drew a hat.
That's what I wrote about for my admissions for my personal essay for Newhouse.
I am a huge Sondheim fan. Have you seen the new production of Merrily We Roll Along?
I did. I thought it was boring.
Oh no! I loved it. Oh, I was thrilled by it. I thought they fixed all the problems from the original production, which oh my God, I'm disappointed in that. But that's you're wounding me. I loved it.
It's wonderful music, and I think Jonathan Groff might win the Tony Award.
Yeah.
I thought he was pretty good, but I thought there's an underlying boringness to the book that I don't think
something. There may be a see, it's funny, the book spoke to me. You talk about how individuals can impact it in different ways, and maybe it's just where I am in my life, not that not to cast aspersions. Oh my God, it impacted me. I was flipped out. But anyway, but given what you just wrote about German art up till World War II, are you tracking what's going on? And I know we're going over here, but now you again, shoot, man, I wish I'd known about this earlier. Are you tracking with what's going on with the new revival of Cabaret? Because we were going to go see it.
Yeah.
But now I'm having second thoughts because I love Cabaret. Are you tracking with this? What do you think about what's going on here?
Yeah, we might disagree more when I finish giving you this answer.
Please.
Yeah, I'm not going to see it because it looks the reviews are awful.
Yes, that's the thing.
I don't like British musicals productions.
Okay.
But I also think Cabaret and Candor and Ebb are really overrated. This is where we might have slightly different things.
Fine.
We're
allowed to disagree about this. You said something in the park with George is your favorite musical. You could say whatever you want after that. Go ahead, please.
Christopher Isherwood is my favorite writer, and I love his work. I feel very strongly about his books, and so the Berlin stories are what the inspiration was for Cabaret. Right. And then my absolute favorite book in the world is Christopher and His Kind, which is his autobiographical, here's what actually happened, like the true version of Berlin stories. And I absolutely love that book. So, I've seen Cabaret on Broadway when Alan Cummings did the revival. I've seen the movie. I've seen the film, another film version of it. I just can't, nothing will ever live up to Christopher and His Kind for me. So to me, Cabaret is just kind of,
I love that perspective. You kidding me? That's invaluable. I'm just nervous because I think you're right. I'm not a big fan of British stagings of musicals either, and this just looks like a mess. I was intrigued by the ability to sit on stage. I had another question that was related to that, and Isherwood and Cabaret. And now I forgot what it was. No, anyway, this was it. Did you see the revival of Fiddler in Yiddish by any chance?
I did not. I did not get a chance to go there. The reviews were incredible though.
It was amazing, and the soundtrack is available on Amazon. Again, that's in heavy rotation in my world. So
did Yiddish make the second act any better? I've never really liked the second act of Fiddler.
Yes. It's, to me, nothing ever lives up to Zero Mostel's production, but I just found it mesmerizing. I found the entire thing mesmerizing. In fact, the only thing that didn't sound right with me in it was they changed "If I Was a Rich Man" to "If I Was a Rothschild," and that was to me a little tropey. Right. I mean that's the only thing that may have just ruined it for you. But for those of you who are listening, Zachary's got a very sour expression on his face as a result of that. Zachary, listen, how do folks find out more about the good work that you guys are doing, and that you guys are doing at Campus Reform?
Thank you. They can go to campusreform.org. Also, our YouTube channel is Campus Reform, and they can see our videos and read our articles. And there's also a tip line on our website. So anyone who has evidence of liberal bias happening on their campus, whether it's anti-Semitism or another iteration of it, can send us information, and we will keep you anonymous.
Zach, you and I need to sit down and have a much further conversation. Maybe we need to do something where you and I go see a show together, because I think that would be we should get a group of folks together to go see a show.
That would be a good podcast episode.
I think so. Yes. All right. Well, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
This has been yet another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I am your host, Andrew Langer. As I've said, please, if you are watching us on YouTube, take a listen to us on one of the many fine podcast platforms that are out there. Please subscribe, leave a review, leave some comments. Let me know what you think about the Lunch Hour. You can also follow me on Twitter, by the way, at Andrew_Langer. Please, everybody, enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.